most common thing about working with deaf actors, again, is probably the language barrier, that we're working in 2 different languages. And that is not dissimilar to working in other productions with other languages. Again, there's different practical ways to help that and all of that, but that in that situation, fundamentally it is actually the same thing. And for me, it's like people forget that when you're working in multiple languages, it just takes more time. That's it. And it takes just more time to really make sure that everyone is on the same page all at the same time. And so that's it. And so in a way, it's a kind of simple answer. But if you can acknowledge that, then your process will move along much better. In terms of some things that I learned or didn't know about working with deaf actors, one of the things that we're considering is what is our use of staging and props and light. So kind of like these things that we consider. For example, the example for me is ASL does use 2-handed signing. It is possible to sign with one hand if someone has a drink in their hand or something like that. But are those choices that an actor makes? If a scene requires a prop, and a prop that requires 2 hands, and there's action in that, how do they also communicate beyond that? So those are kinds of things that are practical things that come with what's happening with their hands. At the same time, the way they communicate to another character in the scene. If someone is off stage and in a different room and they want to talk to their partner, they have to come into the room to talk to their partner, unless they're doing it on phone or something like that. So there's kind of practical staging things where we have to place the 2 characters in a proximity enough for them to be able to have visual sight lines so that they can communicate with each other. So those are just small things that kind of go, oh, right, that's not going to work if she's off stage doing something in the house and she's calling for her husband or something. That's not, that might be a very normal construct in a theatrical setting and in perhaps in a home setting, but in this situation, how would they communicate? So very small things like that, but I think they're important to think about as well. So for people who want to work with deaf actors but don't really know where to start, there's lots of practical things that I think this toolkit will talk about. But one of the philosophical things is to get over it and do it. and that's kind of to remove the fear and kind of remove the fear of not doing it right or it might cost too much. But in fact, actually, if you're compelled to want to work with a deaf actor, go to an ASL interpretive performance one day in your city and see if you can meet deaf actors, see if you can meet people in the deaf community. Do your research so that you know the community which you're going to. At the same time, I think you just have to go for it, and go for it with a sensitivity, yes, but if you don't just do it, it won't happen. I think one of the biggest learnings that I've had working on the DATT, working on ultrasound, is, in fact, deaf culture is everywhere. And maybe that's kind of a confirmation bias, but I don't actually think so. I think that once we began to talk about deaf culture from our theatrical perspective, other theater people said, oh yes, you know what? My father's deaf and he's just learning to sign and I'm learning. Or other people said, yeah, my cousin's deaf. And it was actually a real enlightenment because we talk about marginalized cultures. We talk about them as invisible. We talk about them as not being around, but actually they are. And it just takes encouragement. It takes opportunity for people to say, oh, you know what? People come up to me and say, I studied ASL up until university. And no one knew. And they're like, I don't have time to use it. I never used it, but I just thought it was beautiful. Or other people say, actually literally people come out of the woodwork with some understanding of deaf culture and with an attraction to it. And that's been really beautiful to see, that people kind of have an opportunity then to talk about deaf culture. And I think it's just bringing things into the consciousness. getting into conversations about who is invited to your space. Now, we have a studio, but I'm talking about the space you create when you make a show. And so who is invited to your space? And the way that one particular theatre person from the UK framed it is that if you have barriers to your theatrical space, to a particular community, then it is as good as saying you are not inviting them. So, for example, if you don't have an ASL interpreted performances, then I have to ask, why do you not want deaf people at your theatre? And I think that's a fundamental change for me to frame that question that way. Because imagine I created an art piece and I set it up in such a way, the system was set up and the artwork was set up in such a way where I said, I made this piece, but Black people can't come to it. That is effectively what we do when we do not have inclusive ideas of how to invite people to our shows.